Chancellor, thanks so much for joining the BBC here at this lovely setting. Quite a moment in the world economy as you stand here, meetings with the world's finance ministers.
Well, the world has changed, and we can see that all around us. And I think every finance minister that's here for the IMF and G20 and G7 meetings this week know in their own economy that things have changed and that we all need to step up to the challenges that we face in building more secure and resilient economies. And look, we're all grappling with this issue of tariffs, but I think that there is an understanding, at least I understand, why President Trump wants to address some of the global imbalances there are in the system. Some countries running very large and persistent trade surpluses and a need to address that through global economic sort of fora. But Britain is not the cause of those problems.
Right.
We are also, like the US, a country that runs globally a trade deficit, not a surplus. And with the US, we have balanced trade, neither a surplus nor a deficit. And that's why I sort of think that there is a deal there to be done with the US. But I think it is important that we understand why the US are doing what they're doing. They were elected on a change mandate last year. The UK Labour government was elected on a change mandate last year. In both of our countries, many working people felt that the economy was not working for them. And both of our governments, in our own ways, are trying to address that.
So there's a lot to unpack here. It's obviously very diplomatic to say the world has changed. I mean, and obviously you're referring to the fact that extraordinary moment where not so far from here, the President of the United States comes up with a list. We're low down on that list with a 10% tariff. But what did you feel when you saw that? I mean, it surpassed the expectations of even the insiders here in Washington. It was quite some moment, that.
Well, Donald Trump was elected on a mandate to increase tariffs. I think that what we need to do now is act with cool heads and try and reduce those tariff barriers. Obviously, bilaterally, we want to achieve that between the UK and the US, but the UK doesn't benefit from trade barriers anywhere in the world because it just depresses global growth and it pushes up global inflation. So we're going to play our part, and we're working flat out to try and secure a deal that reduces those trade barriers. But I also have spent time this week with some of my European counterparts, Canadian counterpart, etc., because all of us have got a shared objective in getting these trade barriers down to get growth back on track.
Okay, so you're sounding, I mean, is it the right word, sympathetic or understanding of some of the Trump position on tariffs? Can I just put to you that that's a choice in terms of strategy? You make the argument that we've got balanced trade, you don't need to tariff us. Whereas what you could argue from an economics perspective is the whole idea that running a surplus or a tariff is a sign of cheating is wrong. I mean, have you made that point? You obviously understand that point. Why would you not make that point?
I think there's two reasons why these persistent trade surpluses that some countries have, not just with the US, but actually with the UK and other countries as well. There's two reasons why they can be problematic, especially if persistent in the way that they are. The first is that it does mean that jobs flow overseas. And as I say, in the UK and the US, we've both got democratic mandates to create more good jobs, paying decent wages in our countries. But also, it comes back to a point that I made a speech here in Washington 2 years ago, where I spoke about something that I called Securonomics, about building a more secure and more resilient economy. And I said in that speech that globalization, as we once knew it, was dead. The era of hyper-globalization was over. It does matter where things are made and who makes them. We can't be agnostic about that like we have been in the past. It's why, for example, the British government stepped in just over a week ago to take control over British Steel, because we did not want to be the only G7 economy that didn't have the capacity to make virgin steel in our country. It's why we've stepped in this week to reform how we treat low-value imports that result in high street businesses being undercut by cheap imports. So I do think it matters where things are made and who makes them. And I believe in free trade, I absolutely do. But I also think it has got to be fair trade. And when there's not a level playing field, that can be disruptive for countries. And I do want to see changes in how the global trade system works.
If I say to you how the Trump administration has treated our country is absolutely unfair, I mean, is that something you communicate to Secretary Bessant, to the Americans? You know, on their measures, they run a surplus with us,
So
and they have still levied a 10% tariff, 25% on our
yeah,
cars.
so the point that I'm making is that our countries have got balanced trade.
Yeah.
These actions are not necessary, and that we can reduce barriers to trade. You know, the exact opposite from increasing barriers to trade. I want to see reduced barriers to trade, and that works both ways.
Yeah.
You know, both of our countries should be looking to reduce those tariff barriers, because we are countries that have balanced trade. We've got nothing to fear from each other. We do not, you know, involve ourselves in, you know, the sort of subsidies of exports. We don't suppress domestic demand, the criticisms of some countries around the world. So, of course, making those points to the US administration, but we do it on a basis of facts, on information, but also expressing our shared objectives to build a more balanced global economy, and to create in both of our economies more good jobs paying decent wages. And I'll just sort of add this, that obviously tariffs is the big issue at the moment, but even if it wasn't for tariffs, I'd want to be having trade discussions with the US, for example, on areas like technology, where outside the US, the UK is a #1 place for US tech companies and other tech companies to invest, because of our great universities, our entrepreneurial spirit, etc. And we should really capitalise on that as a country, and bring in more of that investment, especially because it is an area where the US rightly has concerns around the sort of sharing of secure information and data. So it's an area where I want to see a technological partnership between our countries based on the sort of scientific enterprise of the UK and the US. So as well as dealing with the here and now, the tariffs issue, I also want to use this opportunity and the discussions we're having with our US counterparts to enhance trade, not just get back to the status quo. You know, that's not good enough for me. I want to take our relationship to the next level.
Okay, well, let me put an alternative strategy to you, which is that perhaps, and we're already seeing some ructions in the markets, which are kind of entirely caused by the tariff turmoil. We're seeing some domestic US businesses now talking about empty shelves. We're seeing freight container traffic from China collapsing. The Americans are feeling the weight of the decisions that were made in the Rose Garden 3 weeks ago. Maybe if the rest of the G7 at this point said, we don't accept the 10% universal tariff on a collective basis, we don't want to do this, no one wants this, it's time for this all to go, that would be the right strategy, rather than trying to carve off a side deal for the UK.
Well, look, I want to see other countries as well be successful in reducing trade barriers. This is certainly not an either or. We won't celebrate if the UK gets a deal, but other countries are still impacted, because, of course, that has a knock-on effect on global demand and global inflation. And as an open trading economy, we're hit by global tariffs, not just tariffs on the UK. But, you know, our role is to try and secure the best possible deal for British industry and British jobs. But look, I don't think that the idea that you're sort of suggesting that we should try and escalate this is the right one.
Would
And
be, would
we're
it be
actually
escalation? It would
well,
be response
no,
to
no.
it'd be response to extraordinary
But you know,
idea from the
Faisal,
Americans.
as good as well as I do, that if we were to respond by increasing tariffs, that would result in a greater suppression of global demand. That would put greater upward pressure on inflation at the time we're trying to reduce inflation and go for growth. So the best way to respond to this is with cool heads, always acting in the
By not
national
responding.
interest.
Maybe it might just focus minds a bit more. Focus minds
Look,
in Congress.
we have asked the Trade Remedies Authority to look at options. We've asked British businesses to come forward with what response they want to see. But actually, the overwhelming view of businesses in Britain is that we should concentrate on getting a deal, not concentrating on retaliation and ratcheting up the tariffs, because that would be no good for anybody.
What about Britain's place in the world? Does this mean is there an opportunity here for Britain to be this?
It's a massive opportunity.
Oh right, okay.
Massive
In the
opportunity.
turmoil. Yeah.
A massive opportunity, because what Britain is able to offer today is political and financial, including fiscal, stability. And actually, a lot of that stability is in short order around the world at the moment. But as a country, last year, people voted overwhelmingly for a government that was prioritising growth, and also prioritising growth that would benefit ordinary working people. We've got a mandate to make the reforms to regulation, to planning, to our pension system, to try and unlock growth in our economy. And at the same time, we've got a mandate for improving trade relations with countries around the world. You know, I understand why there's so much focus on our trading relationship with the US, but actually our trading relationship with Europe is arguably even more important, because they're our nearest neighbours and trading partners. And next month there will be a summit between the UK and the EU, building on the work that Keir Starmer and others, including myself, have done over the last few months to rebuild that trust. And, you know, obviously I'll be meeting Scott Bessant this week. I'm in Washington, but I've also this week met the French, the German, the Spanish, the Polish, the Swedish, the Finnish finance ministers, because it is so important that we rebuild those trading relationships with our nearest neighbours in Europe. And we're going to do that in a way that is good for British jobs and British consumers.
Just gives us a little sense of what it's like around the G7, G20 table right now. Tense?
Obviously, there are strains. We are all following what's happening in our domestic bond markets, in our equity markets, and we all know that that uncertainty is bad for investment. In the UK economy, we're beginning to turn things around after the more than a decade of stagnant growth. I don't want that to be put at risk by uncertainty emanating from tariffs. But the way to approach that is to work hard on getting a deal, making the case for free trade, but not putting all of our eggs in one basket. You know, we had a really successful economic and financial dialogue with the Indians in London just a couple of weeks ago. We're in negotiations with the Gulf countries to secure a trade and investment deal. There's the European deal that's there to be done, and the US deal. And if we can secure those things, and I don't think it is a wild prospect to think that we can, then that puts Britain in a really strong position to galvanise our economy, to bring more investment, to bring entrepreneurs to Britain, and be an open trading nation, trading all around the world, whilst also fixing some of those deep problems at home with a regulatory system and a planning system that do not work today. And we're making those changes so that we can fulfil our potential as a country and put more money in the end in working people's pockets.